Let's turn to climate change now, or the climate crisis. And last month's UN report has underscored the urgency of focusing on global warming. Some investors might be wondering how they can play their part in the low-carbon transition. JP Morgan has set up a fund seeking to invest in companies which are developing solutions to the climate crisis. Joining us now, Katie McGee, investment specialist at JP Morgan Asset Management. Katie, thank you for joining us. As things stand, what is the gap between technology innovation and the challenges posed by the climate crisis?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And that's a really good point. So this UN report that came out last month effectively highlighted the urgency of addressing the climate change challenge. Temperatures have already increased by about 1 degree Celsius relative to pre-industrial levels. And every single year, we emit about 50 billion tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. One of the big challenges, though, is that actually our demand for energy across the globe is increasing. As more countries develop, as more people move into the middle class, we're actually going to need more energy. So clearly the answer to addressing climate change can't just be let's stop using energy. What it really has to be is identifying innovative new solutions to address this challenge. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Okay, so Katie, so you're looking at companies that are developing and scaling solutions, as you referenced, to tackle climate change. But where do you put the criteria for success? How much material difference or material change do these businesses have to create for them to qualify on your radar? Because you talk to any energy business these days, any construction business, any consumer products business, and they will all tell you they are trying to address climate change. So how do you measure the actual improvements and the actual advancements that they are achieving?
Oh, that's a great point, because actually what we are going to need to see is that every company across every industry is going to need to make a change and think about new and different ways that they can still provide the same goods and services, but with a lower carbon footprint. What we're specifically looking at here is those companies that are developing these innovative new solutions. And so we've kind of taken a step back and said, what are the key drivers of greenhouse gas emissions, the key drivers of climate change, and broken them down into 5 different areas. And these are based on the 5 biggest drivers of greenhouse gas emissions: electricity and heat, buildings, transportation, agriculture. And so some of the really innovative areas that we're looking are at companies that are producing renewable energy sources, for example, whether that be wind, hydro, solar power, but also big companies that are really focused on electrification and helping other companies get there and reduce their carbon footprint. Others might be things like electric vehicles or pushing the envelope in terms of the transportation sector, or actually very interestingly in the agriculture sector, an area that you might not think about necessarily, but actually contributes about 1/5 of all greenhouse gas emissions. There we're finding really exciting opportunities of companies that are developing new technologies to help farmers, only fertilize and water the plants that are needed and really help minimize our environmental impact there.
Katie, from an investment perspective, how important is it to align with government policy?
Completely important. So when we think about this shift, we're actually already starting to see the shift towards climate change solutions happen. We're starting to see renewable energy become a bigger proportion of our energy use, for example, and we see a lot of tailwinds here, whether that be the tremendous advances that we're seeing in technology, the really big shift in terms of consumer attitudes, really focusing on more sustainable products. And then finally, to your point, the fact that governments and policymakers are pushing in this direction is going to have a very, very meaningful impact on all the companies that we invest in. And so when we look forward to things like COP26 later in the year and seeing how different governments and policymakers might think about, whether that be subsidies for more greener forms of energy or potentially new and different regulations, we need to make sure that the companies that we're investing in are really well positioned to withstand that.
Let me ask you about recycling and reusing, and we've talked a number of times on this programme about the notion of the circular economy and companies that design to enable us to move towards more circular practices and to allow things to be recycled more. Where do you see excitement there, Katie? Where do you see businesses that are really managing to either drive consumer change, drive changes in consumer behaviour, or get the pricing really right to make these more viable options?
Yeah, that's a great point, because you know, the more and more that we can develop new goods in less carbon intense ways, that's great. But if we can also start to reuse the goods that we already have, that can be even better. So there are a number of different companies that we might be interested in here. Some are focused on, you know, individual consumers' ability to recycle things. So something like a reverse vending, where consumers can take materials that they've used and recycle them there. But it could also be things like reuse of materials, or actually potentially one of the really interesting areas is recycling steel, for example. Steel and cement production are some of the biggest drivers of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's very challenging to find ways to make those goods in less carbon intense ways. And so the more that we can recycle and reuse them, the better that we can all be.
Katie, I just want to quickly get your views on how you cut through some of the noise, some of the hype, how you avoid some of the greenwashing. I've just come back from China. There's a lot of money flow into some of these green projects there, but innovation costs money, R&D costs money, and a lot of these businesses are nowhere close to monetization. So how do you avoid those kind of risks?
Sure. So a couple of different things there. When we think about investing in these strategies, one of the really exciting things is that these opportunities can exist anywhere. They're not relegated to one specific industry or one specific region. And so we really need to find ways that we can uncover these opportunities wherever they exist. And to your point, many of the really exciting innovations can actually be smaller, newer companies that are really pushing the envelope. So we effectively use a two-step process in terms of our investment and security selection. The first is we use a tool that's very much based in machine learning and big data. It helps us scan through and use our data and analytics to look at hundreds of millions of data sources, looking at company reports, broker research, earnings transcripts, news articles, and really narrowing down the list of companies around the globe and across the market cap spectrum that could be involved in these areas. But then the second step, that's where the human element comes in. And we can use our broad range of research analysts, more than 90 around the globe, who are really focused in on sector-specific due diligence, knowing these companies inside and out, and digging into the weeds on, you know, is this actually a company that we want to own? Do they have a sustainable business model? Is that a price that we're willing to pay? And making sure that we're actually comfortable owning every single security that we hold in the portfolio.